Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank all of you who've been joining us throughout the years. We've been broadcasting the show every weekend since 2005. Yeah, 2005. It's an honor to share with you information and news and analysis about what's going on in Mexico in English and in Spanish. Thank you so much. This was, I would say, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, it was an historical week for Mexican politics. And you can be very critical about what happened. You can be congratulatory, but it was a very interesting moment for Mexico. Right now, as we speak, it seems very likely that Mexico's next president is going to be a woman. So let's just start out with that introduction. Joining us today to talk about what has happened this week, the process by which the parties have been selecting their most likely candidates for president. As you know, presidential elections take place next year. Joining us today is Carlos Ramirez. He is a partner at a consultant firm called Integralia. It's a political consulting firm. Carlos, welcome to the show. Let's grab a little bit of air and let's try to analyze what happened this week. Welcome to Living in Mexico.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Great to be with you.
So let's start with the process of the alliance, which is an alliance between three parties that normally are enemies, political enemies, which is the PRD, the PAN, and the PRI, which this week finally were able to say that they have they don't call her a presidential candidate, but that Xochitl Gálvez will be their candidate. But in order to reach this moment, this announcement, it was a difficult process. Let's talk about the quote unquote primaries of the Mexican opposition.
Sure. So the first thing to acknowledge is that it is certainly a historic moment in terms of that this primary process in both coalitions is something that we had never seen in Mexico's political history. So just by that, one has to acknowledge that this was something new for all Mexicans. Okay, so let me start first with the opposition coalition. So there you have the PAN, the PRI, and the PRD, as you mentioned, historic enemies, political enemies coming together because the only way to defeat Morena and Lopez Obrador, basically in 2024, is coming together. If you don't join forces, clearly Morena is gonna win easily in 2024. So they knew this, and at the very beginning of this process, there was a lot of skepticism. Are they gonna be able to nominate one candidate, either a PAN candidate or a PRI candidate or a PRD candidate that the other two parties accept? So the odds were against the opposition. And I think at the end of the day, it is an enormous success for them that they were able to bring a process that was legitimate, that was open to the society, in which basically anyone who wanted to participate as a candidate was able to do it. There were clear rules. And at the end of the day, Xochitl Gálvez was the winner of the process. And I think just the fact that the PRI is raising the arm of Xochitl Gálvez as a winner is an enormous success for this process. So I think in a nutshell, I would qualify this as an enormous success for the opposition. They have a relatively competitive nominee, and it's looking more interesting than it was just 3 months ago thought about the 2024 election.
Well, you know, I don't know if you saw that meme. It said this is the first time in 100 years that the PRI has not nominated a presidential candidate.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, I think that's just, I think that in itself, it's fascinating. So she's technically cannot be announce herself as a candidate. Yeah. There's because we have to remind our audience, Mexico's Mexico's law, campaign laws, don't allow for this process to take place at this point. But that's going to be a debate for the tribunals and the National Electoral Institute as to what is now going to be allowed or not in selecting candidates towards the future. So that is Xochitl Gálvez will be the candidate for the at least three parties of the opposition. Let's talk about what's happening with the other alliance, Morena, the Green Party, and the Labor Party, because as we speak right now, they're also in a process by which they will select their eventual candidate.
Yeah. So that process has been going on for almost 2 months and a half.
Mm-hmm.
What is amazing is that the preferences of most Mexicans towards the 6 nominees that Morena and its partners have put it for the nomination process haven't moved much, Ana Maria, right? So at the very beginning, at late May, Claudia Sheinbaum had a lead of probably in the order of 10 points over Marcelo Ebrard, the former foreign minister. And 2 months later, really, Claudia is showing 10, 12 points of difference. So really, it hasn't moved much, which probably has to do a lot with 2 very important issues here. One is that most Mexicans are not following that closely this process because the presidential election is on June 2nd. We had never had primaries before in Mexico, so people are not paying too much attention, and that could probably explain why preferences didn't move much. Claudia Sheinbaum started with an advantage, and she still has the advantage and is looking to be the winner on the 6th of September decision that, as the public knows, 5 pollsters, there's going to be 5 polls that will be announced that day, in which basically they will show who has the most preferences. So Sheinbaum is the clear leader. The second reason why preferences didn't move much is that clearly Sheinbaum has an advantage since the beginning. She was always mentioned as the president's predelect and most preferred candidate, and that has had a toll in all the process. There's a lot of governors that are showing support for her, although not very openly. They have to be careful, but clearly they are helping Claudia. There's also the bureaucracy. A lot of bureaucracy, federal bureaucracy, is showing preferences for Claudia, again, silently. So she has had the apparatus behind her. And I think that's going to be fundamental for her to win the nominee.
Well, and it also is on both sides. We can see both the opposition parties and the official party. We can start seeing how, and the problems that are going to kind of pop up during the elections next year. I mean, there seems to be a lot of indications, Carlos, that Claudia Sheinbaum and to some extent the other candidates, I'm thinking of Adán Augusto, the former Secretary of Gobernación, were clearly being supported with government resources, both federal and state resources. Yeah. And, that is just right out illegal. It's illegal. And not only now, it would have been illegal last year. You just can't use resources for personal gains. And in this case, she's been using resources, and it looks like that the Secretary of Gobernación has been using resources to do campaigning. So, this is going to be a problem next year. Clearly, it's going to be a problem.
Absolutely, we're going to have a huge problem going towards the 2024 presidential election in terms of the money being spent in the campaigns. because this is not the US, right? Where basically candidates can spend almost whatever they want. They can recollect money from the private sector, and the rules are very open and liberal in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. In Mexico, rules are very strict. Private people, companies cannot give money to candidates, or they only can give a very little amount of money. All money spent in campaigns is public, comes from the public coffers. So, but we know that in the past, there has been a lot of money flowing from different parts, and clearly that has, the National Electoral Institute hasn't been able to control that. Now, on 2024, it's going to be worse, even worse, because the government, the federal government, is likely to use the money coming from the budget to spend it in favor of its candidate. That is very likely. It's going to be very tough for the National Electoral Institute. Definitely.
Well, but you know, even in the United States, that has very liberal laws that allows the candidates to collect money from supporters and from business. And there are some rules, but it's very liberal when you compare it to Mexico. But even in the United States, there are very stringent laws in terms of using government resources to do campaigning. So that, I think, is going to be it's going to be interesting to see how the National Electoral Institute handles this. And I just think it's fascinating that the person who's going to represent the official party is going to be selected by a poll of 12,000 people. Is that correct? Is that how the decision's going to be made?
Remember that a poll is always a small number of people are polled, but it is representative of the population. So I think having 5 different polls, each one of 2,500 polled people, basically is more than enough to have a very representative result in terms of who is the preferred candidate of the 6. So I think the process that the official party chose was in some way it is relatively open. I mean, you cannot go and vote directly, but it's going to be representative in the sense that it will have a relatively high number of people being polled. And I think it will show who is the leader. And I think something that really hurt, and is likely to, when we know the results, probably hurt Marcelo Ebrard, is that there are 6 candidates. So the preferences are going to be very fragmented. And that is likely to help even more Claudia Sheinbaum.
And the other issue I think that is also very interesting is the fact that the primaries for the Frente Amplio, the opposition parties, was supposed to include people going out and vote. Very similar, some similarities to how it happens in the United States. And they just simply couldn't do it, in part because there was a decision by Beatriz Paredes to step down because she said the polls didn't favor her. So she made the decision, or the party made the decision, the PRI, to support Xochitl Galvez, and then Beatriz Paredes decided that she was not going to continue with the process. So there was no voting taking place. It was supposed to be taking place this weekend, but there was a lot of concerns in terms of the logistics of this process, including the lack of security. There was no clear cut process by which they could assure nobody was cheating, or people from Morena could be involved in trying to vote in favor, for example, of Beatriz Paredes. I mean, there was a lot of concern in terms of the process. And we also need to say that even the survey that's supposed to be taking place for the Morena candidates, they're having problems with this polling and doing this survey, just the organization of it. So it is a huge reminder as to how we should recognize the work that the National Electoral Institute does. I mean, just think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, every 3 years, the National Electoral Institute puts 160,000 ballot places in all the country. And they are able to count more than 15 million votes in just a couple of hours, 2-3 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, I mean, yes, the opposition finally canceled the primary process election that was supposed to be taken on Sunday. I think it was the combination of Xochitl leading very much on the poll, leading by a huge margin, almost 20 points, well, 15, 20 points. But also because of the logistics that you mentioned. It was going to be a very challenging process.
Daunting.
Probably is going to be a very low vote. So they were a little bit afraid that there was going to be could lead to some violence or to some problems. So at the end of the day, I don't know, probably they were a little bit naive at the very beginning just to propose a primary voting process. But in any case, I think Xochitl Gálvez is the winner, and I think she is legitimate enough, and that she clearly was going to win also the primary. So she's going to become a relatively competitive candidate. 4 months ago, nobody expected Xochitl to be there, and everyone basically said the opposition is dead meat for 2024. Not anymore. It's going to be more competitive.
Let me ask you, I have about a minute and a half left. What should we be focusing on the next couple of weeks, at least until the process formally starts? And the reason why I ask you this is I wrote a piece, and it was published this week, in which I'm not too sure I'm trying to understand what the role of the parties are going to be. You know, how much independence is Xochitl Gálvez is going to have versus, for example, the PRI, the PAN, in terms of kind of creating a campaign that can be successful versus the interest of the party that still is talking about, they're going to try to reach agreements on both state candidates and local candidates.
Yeah. It's going to be very challenging for both coalitions, but particularly for the opposition coalition, to come together and choose the nominees for all the different posts that are going to be in the 2024, the 2nd of June election. Remember, 9 states, 500 deputies, 128 senators, more than 1,500 municipalities. A lot is at stake. So they have to come together, distribute those positions, and go to they are going together to all the election. So that's going to be challenging. I think Xochitl is she's going to have big challenges to bring the PRI, make them feel empowered and be part of the process. But she's going to have a lot of pressure also from the PAN, because the PAN is her party, and the PAN will want more positions. So what's going to come next? Probably 2 months of silence, where the candidates, both most likely Claudia and Xochitl, will go to basically calm down a bit, start planning their campaign, and start bringing the names of who are going to be the candidates. And then by the end of November, they will come back and they will start a pre-campaign that's what we've seen so far, but that's they're going to come back, and they will likely be participating in more open processes. But the campaign by itself, Ana Maria, I'll finish here, will start in March. So it's still
they got a long time
to go, a long way.
Long way to go. Carlos Ramirez, he is a partner at Integralia consulting firm. Thank you so much for joining us here on Living in Mexico.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico. Please don't